sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at the Palisades Fire in Southern California.
Yeah.
And this is a developing situation, as I'm sure many of you know.
Right.
So we're working with a CBS Los Angeles news report from just this morning, January 7, 2025.
Wow.
So it is a very recent fire.
Very.
And things are still unfolding. So
Absolutely.
we're going to be looking at what we know now and
Right.
and what we can learn so far.
Yeah. And you know, one of the first things that investigators will want to determine is the fire's origin.
Oh, okay.
So, you know,
Yeah.
once they've got a handle on containment, they can start piecing together what happened.
Yeah, because knowing the cause can help prevent future fires.
Right.
I mean, what are the usual suspects when it comes to wildfires starting?
You might be surprised to learn that it's usually not lightning strikes,
Okay.
though those do happen.
Yeah.
Most wildfires are actually sparked by human activity.
Really? So we're talking accidents, carelessness, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It could be a spark from equipment, a downed power line, a campfire that wasn't put out properly,
Right.
even something as small as a discarded cigarette.
Wow.
And then, of course, there's the possibility of arson, which is a whole other issue.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So it really emphasizes how important it is to be extra careful, especially in dry, windy conditions like the ones they're having in Southern California.
For sure.
And speaking of wind, this report mentions those notorious Santa Ana winds are a major factor in how quickly this fire spread.
Right.
I know they're famous for fanning the flames, so to speak, but can you break down exactly why they're so dangerous when it comes to wildfires?
Think of them as giant hair dryers blowing across the landscape.
Okay.
They originate inland where it's hot and dry, and they rush towards the coast, sucking the moisture out of everything in their path.
Wow.
That leaves vegetation incredibly dry and primed to burn.
Oh, wow.
Then their high speeds act like a bellows,
Yeah.
pushing embers ahead of the fire
Yeah.
and starting new spot fires far away from the main blaze.
Oh, gosh. They can also create swirling eddies that change direction unpredictably, making it extremely difficult for firefighters to anticipate where the fire will go next.
So it sounds like they're creating their own chaotic weather system within the fire.
Yeah, you could say that.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
This report says they were clocking in at 40 mile per hour when the fire started this morning near 1190 North Piedra Morada Drive, with predictions of gusts up to 100 mile per hour.
Horrendous.
Yeah, that must make fighting this fire incredibly difficult, even terrifying.
Absolutely. These conditions are incredibly challenging even for the most experienced firefighters.
I bet.
Imagine trying to control a blaze that's essentially being supercharged by hurricane-force winds.
Yeah.
The fire can jump roads, travel uphill at astonishing speeds,
Gosh.
and even create its own updrafts that further intensify the wind.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's
Scary.
It's a beast. It's a beast.
Yeah.
And this report paints a pretty intense picture of the scene. They describe abandoned cars on Sunset Boulevard, people fleeing on foot at the urging of firefighters, and these massive plumes of smoke visible for miles.
Wow.
That sounds almost apocalyptic.
The visuals are definitely striking.
Yeah.
And for the people experiencing it firsthand, the psychological impact can be profound.
Yeah.
The suddenness of it all, the feeling of vulnerability, the uncertainty of what comes next.
Right.
It can be overwhelming.
It can be a lot, and the report highlights that with a quote from a resident named Krishan Chaudhry. He said he was just watching the smoke, and all of a sudden we saw fire everywhere.
That sudden escalation is typical of wind-driven wildfires.
Right.
One minute you might see smoke in the distance, and the next the fire's at your doorstep.
Which is why those evacuation orders are so critical.
Absolutely.
This report mentions that over 30,000 people have already been evacuated,
Goodness.
and over 10,000 homes are potentially in danger. Those numbers are staggering.
It highlights the sheer scale of this event and the massive logistical challenges involved in managing an evacuation of this size.
Yeah.
You have to consider everything from transportation and shelter
Right.
to food, water, and medical care for those who have been displaced.
And the Westwood Recreation Center is serving as a shelter for some of those evacuees, right?
Yes.
The report also mentions that several schools have had to relocate, including Palisades Elementary, Marquez Elementary,
Yeah.
Paul Revere Middle School,
Right.
and Corpus Christi School.
Right, and that's just one example of the ripple effects these fires can have.
Sure.
It's not just about fighting the flames, it's about dealing with the cascading impacts on the entire community.
Wow. And those impacts can be long-lasting, but right now the focus is clearly on getting this fire under control.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about the firefighting efforts?
The report says Governor Newsom has mobilized resources,
Okay.
including sending 110 fire engines to Southern California.
Wow.
It's a massive coordinated effort that involves ground crews, air tankers dropping water and retardant,
Right.
and specialized equipment designed to cut fire lines and remove fuel sources.
Wow. So it's a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely.
But with those winds, I imagine it's a constant struggle to keep the fire contained.
It is.
There was mention of homes already burning in the report.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's often the reality of these fast-moving fires.
Yeah.
The speed at which they spread can easily overwhelm even the best firefighting efforts,
Yeah.
especially in areas where homes are built close to wildland areas.
Right. And that's kind of the case here in the Palisades, right?
Also much so.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be to these forces of nature, especially when they're amplified by human actions.
Absolutely.
And speaking of amplified risk, the report mentions a red flag warning was issued for the area similar to the one before the mountain fire last year.
Right.
Can you explain what that means and why it's such a big deal?
A red flag warning means that conditions are ripe for extreme fire behavior.
Okay.
It's like a giant neon sign flashing fire danger.
Okay.
Essentially, it means that any spark, whether intentional or accidental, has a high probability of igniting a wildfire. And once it starts, it will spread rapidly and be very difficult to control.
So it's not just a warning about the wind, it's a warning about the overall fire risk.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're looking at a combination of factors. Low humidity, dry fuels, and of course those powerful Santa Ana winds.
Right.
And when you add those elements together, you get a recipe for a potentially catastrophic fire.
And that comparison to the mountain fire is pretty sobering considering it burned nearly 20,000 acres last year.
Right.
It seems like Southern California has been hit hard lately, especially with the Franklin fire impacting Malibu in December 2024.
You're right, and that leads us to a larger conversation about the increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires, not just in California, but globally.
Which is a topic we definitely need to explore further.
Yeah.
This Palisades fire is just the latest example of a trend that's becoming increasingly alarming. But first, let's take a closer look at what's being done to help those who have been affected by this fire.
That sounds like a good place to start. The community response to these events is always fascinating and inspiring, even in the midst of chaos and devastation.
Okay, let's dig into that after a quick break.
It's really incredible to see how communities rally in these situations.
Yeah.
It's not just about putting out the fire.
Right.
It's about supporting those who've been displaced.
Yeah.
And ensuring their well-being.
Absolutely. It's heartwarming to see that side of humanity shining through during a crisis.
Yeah.
This report mentions the Westwood Recreation Center is serving as a shelter, but what other kinds of resources are available to these folks? I imagine they're feeling overwhelmed right now.
You're right. The impact goes far beyond the immediate threat of the flames. Aside from the physical dangers, there's the emotional and logistical upheaval to contend with.
Right.
Thankfully, there's a whole network of support that kicks into gear during events like these. We're talking everything from temporary housing food banks and clothing donations
Wow.
to mental health services and financial assistance.
That's amazing.
Organizations like the Red Cross, along with countless local community groups, step up to provide essential aid to those who've been affected.
Thinking about having to evacuate so suddenly, I can't even imagine the anxiety and uncertainty.
Right.
It's good to know those mental health services are there to help people cope with the emotional toll.
Yeah, that's a crucial aspect that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Leaving your home not knowing what you'll return to.
Right.
The disruption to your routine.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly stressful. These services provide a safe space for people to process their experiences, connect with others who understand what they're going through, and access professional help if needed.
The report also mentioned that some schools had to relocate, Palisades Elementary, Marquez Elementary, and Paul Revere Middle School among them.
Right.
It seems like these fires create a domino effect, impacting every facet of daily life.
Precisely. And relocating schools is just one example.
Yeah.
Think about the businesses forced to close the impact on tourism,
Right.
the strain on emergency services,
Yeah.
and the potential for long-term economic consequences.
Oh, wow.
It really underscores the importance of having robust emergency plans in place, not just at the individual level, but for institutions and businesses as well.
Preparedness is key, it seems.
Absolutely.
And for those listening who are concerned about wildfire risk in their area, What steps would you recommend they take?
That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
There's a wealth of information available online and through local organizations.
Okay.
Ready.gov is an excellent resource that provides guidance on creating a family emergency plan,
Okay.
assembling a disaster supply kit, and understanding wildfire risks specific to your area.
And I imagine CAL FIRE probably has resources tailored for California residents, too.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
CAL FIRE's website and app are incredibly helpful for Californians.
Okay.
They provide real-time alerts, evacuation procedures, defensible space guidelines, and information on current fire conditions.
So knowledge is power when it comes to these situations.
Absolutely.
But let's step back for a minute and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
We've touched on the role of climate change in increasing wildfire activity, but can you delve a bit deeper into the science behind that connection?
Sure.
What are the mechanisms at play?
Well, we've known for decades that human activity is changing the climate,
Right.
and those changes have a direct impact on wildfire risk. As global temperatures rise due to greenhouse gas emissions, we see a few critical effects.
Okay.
Firstly, warmer temperatures lead to increased evaporation, which dries out vegetation and creates more flammable fuel.
Okay.
Think of it as turning forests into tinderboxes.
So it's like preheating the oven for a wildfire.
Rather grim analogy, but yes, in essence.
Yeah.
Secondly, those warmer temperatures also lead to earlier snowmelt in many regions, which extends the length of the fire season.
Right.
The window of opportunity for fires to ignite and spread becomes wider and wider.
Yeah. And as we were discussing earlier, those powerful Santa Ana winds we're seeing in California are also influenced by climate change, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Climate change is altering weather patterns globally, leading to more extreme weather events, including heat waves, droughts, and powerful wind events that exacerbate fire risk.
It's like all these factors are aligning to create the perfect storm, literally for these massive wildfires.
Yeah.
It's pretty sobering.
It is, and the scientific consensus is clear climate change is a significant driver of increased wildfire activity.
Right.
And it's not just a California issue.
Yeah.
We're seeing this trend worldwide, from Australia to the Amazon rainforest.
Wow.
And something we need to address urgently.
So while fighting individual fires is obviously important, it sounds like tackling climate change is the real key to solving this problem long term.
Absolutely. We can't just keep reacting to each fire as it comes.
Right.
We need to address the root causes. That means transitioning to cleaner energy sources, investing in sustainable practices, and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
It sounds like a monumental task.
It is a big one.
What gives you hope in the face of such a daunting challenge?
What gives me hope is that we already have the solutions at hand.
Okay.
We have the technology to transition to renewable energy. We know how to implement sustainable practices in agriculture, forestry, and urban planning.
Okay.
What we need now is the collective will to act.
That's where the power of individual action comes in, right?
Exactly.
What can our listeners do to make a difference?
That's a great question.
It can feel overwhelming to know where to start.
You're right. Individual actions might seem small, but when multiplied across millions of people, they can have a real impact.
Yeah.
We can make conscious choices in our daily lives to reduce our carbon footprint,
Okay.
conserve water support, sustainable businesses, and advocate for policies that address climate change. We can also get involved in local efforts to improve wildfire preparedness and support organizations working on climate solutions.
So it's about empowering ourselves and our communities to be part of the solution?
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable and resilient future.
So we've talked about the immediate response to the Palisades Fire, the long-term challenges of climate change, and the importance of individual action.
Right.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't fully addressed yet.
Okay.
The investigation into the fire's cause. We touched on the common causes of wildfires earlier, but what can you tell us about the investigative process itself?
It's fascinating, really. It's like a giant puzzle where investigators have to piece together clues to determine the fire's origin.
Okay.
They examine burn patterns, collect evidence from the scene, interview witnesses, and analyze weather data to try to pinpoint the exact location and cause of the ignition.
So they're looking for telltale signs that might point to where and how the fire started.
Exactly. They'll also collect physical evidence from the suspected point of origin. Things like charred debris, potential ignition sources,
Right.
and even soil samples that can reveal the presence of accelerants if arson is suspected.
It's almost like a forensic investigation, but on a massive scale.
You could say that, and it's not just about looking at the physical evidence.
Right.
Investigators will also conduct interviews with witnesses, firefighters who were first on the scene, and residents who may have seen something unusual before the fire broke out.
So it's a multifaceted approach combining hard evidence with eyewitness accounts.
Right.
And all of this information helps paint a picture of what happened, leading them to the most likely cause of the fire.
Precisely. Sometimes the cause is pretty obvious, like a downed power line or a campfire that wasn't fully extinguished.
Right.
But other times, it can be much more subtle and require a lot more digging to piece together the sequence of events.
And this information isn't just about assigning blame, right?
Not at all.
It's about learning from these incidents and preventing future fires.
Absolutely. Understanding how and why wildfires start allows us to develop targeted prevention strategies.
Okay.
If a certain type of equipment is often involved, we can improve safety regulations.
Right.
If human carelessness is a common factor, we can step up public education campaigns.
Sure.
And if arson is suspected, well, that leads to a whole other set of investigative procedures.
So it's a cycle of response, investigation, and prevention.
It is.
And hopefully, each time we go through this cycle, we learn something new that can help us better protect our communities and our environment.
I hope so.
This entire deep dive has been a stark reminder of how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
The weather, human actions, climate change, and even the way we build our communities all play a role in the wildfire equation.
It's a complex tapestry woven together by natural forces and human choices.
Yeah.
And the more we understand the intricate patterns of this tapestry, the better equipped we'll be to navigate these challenges and create a more resilient future.
You've given us a lot to think about, and I think this conversation has highlighted something really important.
Okay.
While these large-scale events can feel overwhelming, we as individuals aren't powerless.
Right.
We can make choices both individually and collectively that can have a real impact on our planet's future.
Absolutely.
This deep dive into the Palisades Fire is just one small piece of a much larger story about climate change resilience and the power of collective action.
Well said. And it's a story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
As this fire continues to burn and the investigation into its cause progresses, there's much more to learn and much more to do.
And we'll be here to follow the developments and continue the conversation.
Indeed, there's always more to explore.
And with that, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into the Palisades Fire. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue to delve into the complexities of this event and its implications for the future. So we've talked a lot about the immediate impact of this fire and the heroic efforts to contain it and the ripple effects across the community. We even touched on some potential long-term consequences related to climate change. But you mentioned earlier that investigators will be working to determine the fire's origin.
Right.
Do we have any updates on that front?
As of this latest report, no specific cause has been identified yet.
Okay.
It's still early in the investigation, and the priority right now is containing the fire and ensuring the safety of residents and first responders.
That makes sense. It's got to be a tough job, especially with those intense Santa Ana winds still whipping around.
Oh, for sure.
But I'm curious, once things calm down a bit, what kind of process do investigators go through to determine the cause of a wildfire?
It's a fascinating blend of science detective work. Imagine a team of experts meticulously combing through a vast charred landscape, searching for clues. They start by analyzing the burn patterns,
Oh, okay.
the direction the fire traveled, the intensity of the burn in different areas, and the types of fuels that were consumed.
So they're looking for telltale signs that might point to where and how the fire started.
Exactly. They'll also collect physical evidence from the suspected point of origin.
Okay.
Things like charred debris, potential ignition sources, and even soil samples that can reveal the presence of accelerants if arson is suspected.
It's almost like a forensic investigation, but on a massive scale.
You could say that, and it's not just about looking at the physical evidence. Investigators will also conduct interviews with witnesses, firefighters who were first on the scene, and residents who may have seen something unusual before the fire broke out.
So it's a multifaceted approach combining hard evidence with eyewitness accounts.
Right.
And all of this information helps paint a picture of what happened, leading them to the most likely cause of the fire.
Precisely. Sometimes the cause is pretty obvious, like a downed power line or a campfire that wasn't fully extinguished.
Right, right.
But other times it can be much more subtle and require a lot more digging to piece together the sequence of events.
And this information isn't just about assigning blame, right?
No, not at all. It's about learning from these incidents and preventing future fires.
Absolutely. Understanding how and why wildfires start allows us to develop targeted prevention strategies. If a certain type of equipment is often involved, we can improve safety regulations. If human carelessness is a common factor, we can step up public education campaigns. And if arson is suspected, well, that leads to a whole other set of investigative procedures.
Right.
So it's a cycle of response, investigation, and prevention.
It is.
And hopefully each time we go through this cycle, we learn something new that can help us better protect our communities and our environment. This entire deep dive has been a stark reminder of how interconnected everything is. The weather, human actions, climate change, and even the way we build our communities all play a role in the wildfire equation.
It's a complex tapestry woven together by natural forces and human choices. And the more we understand the intricate patterns of this tapestry, the better equipped we'll be to navigate these challenges and create a more resilient future.
You've given us a lot to think about, and I think this conversation has highlighted something really important. While these large-scale events can feel overwhelming, we as individuals aren't powerless. We can make choices in our daily lives that contribute to a solution, whether it's reducing our own carbon footprint, being extra cautious with potential fire hazards, or advocating for policies that address climate change. Each action makes a difference.
Well said. And remember, it's not just about individual actions, it's about collective action.
Yeah, it's about coming together as communities to share knowledge, support each other, and demand change from our leaders. The Palisades Fire is a tragedy, but it's also a call to action, a reminder that we must work together to create a future where wildfires don't pose such a devastating threat.
And that's a powerful note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Palisades Fire. We'll continue to follow the developments and keep you informed. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay safe.